2007 was a good year for goats. Not that kind. The movies kind. In the same year that we got this movie, we also got There Will Be Blood. I mean, what more could you ask for? Is No Country for Old Men one of the greatest movies of all time? Oh, yeah, I would say so. This is a masterful tale that has multiple layers. On one hand, it's a really thrilling cat and mouse chase. On the other hand, it's a movie that's about being over your head, about being too old for your profession, about the death of God and nihilism. Fun times. Now, typically, with most great movies, there's a bit of a divide, at least at first, with critics and the audience. When this movie came out, the audience really was not a big fan of the ending, myself included, but the critics got it. But what I think people began to realize as time went on and we had more time to analyze the film is that that was kind of the point, actually. You weren't really supposed to like the movie. Because the movie is about the bad guy winning, it's about there being no law and order in a state of chaos. We're not used to that. We don't like that as an audience. It's tempting, of course, to just write this movie off as having a terrible ending and thus ruining the experience that you've had so far, but there are so many countless elements that just make it such a great and enjoyable movie, even if you're not a fan of the ending. The biggest and most obvious reason why this movie works so well and why you should enjoy it is Javier Bardem's performance. He won, deservedly so, the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. And one of the reasons why I love Javier Bardem so much, and one of the reasons why I believe he is deserving of this Oscar, is his humility. He gave an explanation, perhaps half jokingly, but also sincerely so, as to why he won this Oscar, and he said it's because he spoke bad English. And that's, at the time at least, and that's why he believed that he won the Oscar for a psychopathic killer who was extremely monotone and delivering all of his lines with this cold, calculated delivery style, because he didn't know what he was saying, so it sort of matched the character's personality. I feel like that in and of itself is a testament to his amazing acting ability. Another more obvious testament to his amazing acting ability is this wonderful clip when he was on the Conan O'Brien show and he talked about how much he hates violence. This psychopathic killer who can peacefully go to sleep after strangling a dude to death with handcuffs is describing why he hates violence. He talked about this one example where he would be off camera, the Coen brothers would give him direction as to what the scene required of him. He would say, okay, I got it. And the prop guy would give him a gun and say, like, oh, thank you. Get it away from me. And as Conan O'Brien so accurately pointed out, that might have ruined the experience for a few viewers, I would think. A lot has been said about Anton Chigurh and the character that he is, but one of the aspects that I've kind of locked onto is how slowly and methodically he moves through life. It would seem like every single movement of his body is carefully planned out to a T. Even when he's moving in a sort of a high energy fashion, like when he kicks down the hotel door and blasts the Mexicans who are waiting there in ambush, he is still so calculated and methodical, almost as if he can see every marking point on the floor as to where he should walk. They're just little tiny examples in this movie, and they might kind of seem like overkill to analyze, but I mean, this movie has been out for 13 years, so I think it's justified. But like when he is looking around for the case of money, and he opens up his palm to check to see which coin could open up the vent. I like how he just sort of slowly opens it, stares at it for maybe a second, and then picks out a dime. Most people, when they're just taking out a pocket full of change, will just pick it out of their pocket and kind of, shake it open, and then pick out the right coin. But not Anton. Anton just slowly opens it up, looks at it, and takes it out. Again, probably overkill in analysis, but what can I say? That's what I noticed. Another reason to love this movie is the absolute dedication it has to pure realism. There's very little music. The composer must have had a field day because all he had to do was create a few little segments here and there of some building line like ooh. It's extremely hard to depict tension in a film without including some use of overused and cheesy music to tell the audience how they should feel. When you are without music, then a good way to create tension is, first of all, the reputation of the characters, and secondly, the editing. The Coen brothers have always had a very interesting approach to editing. Sometimes their editing choices leave me a little confused as to why they decided to cut off at that particular point. But at least in No Country for Old Men, the editing serves as that tool that creates such a high level of tension that is required when there is no music. Most accurately depicted when the dog is running out of the water and Moss is grabbing his gun and he's trying to dry it off before he can shoot this dog that's running at him to attack him. The way that it's edited makes it so effective. And even though there's not a note of music, you're just receding back in your chair like, oh, come on, come on, come on, come on. This movie presents the tone of despair and holds it on you for the entire duration of the film. Even the opening line is just dripping with wariness. I was sheriff of this county when I was 25 years old. Almost as if he thought that he might have been able to do something else with his life at such a young age if he hadn't become sheriff when he was 25. I'm 26 right now, and the idea of being sheriff of a town when I'm 25 a year ago, it's unthinkable. The scene where Shigur pulls over the guy and hits him with that device, whatever it is, and how they kill cattle, is kind of a lesson in always checking for a badge, kids. Because you never know if it's going to be a psychopathic killer. Just be sure that whenever you're pulled over, you can see that the guy is in a full uniform and he's not carrying around some device with an air pressure tank ready to shoot you in the head. We're introduced to Thanos well before the Avengers days. Just a chill dude, looking to kill some game and make off with $2 million. I love his reaction when he finds the money. It's just the chillest of all yas. He opens it up and he goes, yeah. I use that sometimes in my own life when something goes wrong, but there's not really anything I can do about it. Like when I'm at work and I see some kind of cliche, like a customer acting a certain way or a staff person acting a certain way that you just sort of expect that goes along with the territory, and I just go, yeah. Moss is a classic cowboy. He's got the look, he's got the toughness, he's got the straight and direct talking style, he's got that old school down-to-earth intelligence that keeps a psychopathic killer off his tail. For the majority of the movie, at least. Josh Brolin brings a great amount of enjoyment and relatability to the character. A man who shouldn't be underestimated, but at the same time realizes over time that he is indeed over his head. In the scene where Moss goes back home and we're first introduced to his wife, I don't think anybody would ever suspect that the actress who plays her is actually Scottish. Like, very Scottish. Very impressive for her to be able to pull off a Southern accent so well. On the other hand, I'm not really sure if it's necessarily difficult for Scottish people to do Southern, because I've heard that for Europeans, Southern is actually quite easy because it fits the same physiology as their mouth does. I'm not really sure. The scene that's probably talked about the most, and probably has the most artistic merit, at least according to most critics in this movie, is the scene where Shigur goes into the gas station. And he sort of plays a gambling game with the poor, unsuspecting clerk. Now, this scene took me a while to understand at first. I mean, I was only about 17, maybe 18 when I first saw the movie, so I was even dumber than I am now. So I can see why it took some time to understand the fact that Shigur is trying to assess whether this man's life is worth taking or not. That's the part of him that is probably the scariest and hardest to figure out, is that he believes himself to be in charge of whether or not people get to die or get to live. It would seem that in this particular scene, he is most disturbed by the fact that this man married into this business. When I first saw it, I thought he was saying, like, how could you take something like your life and decide to marry into a business like this? How could you take something, your own life, that has all this potential and all these great things you could do with it, and decide to be tied down to the gas station business? But at the same time, I think a man as psychotic as Shigur probably doesn't really care about that. It's clear that this scene is talking about fate, because that seems to be one of the few things that Shigur actually believes in. When he takes the quarter out, he says that this quarter has been traveling for 22 years to get here, and now it's here. As in, this is this moment that fate, for whatever reason, has brought you to, and you need to decide whether or not your life is going to be spared or going to be eliminated. It's kind of like at the very end when he confronts Moss's wife, and she says that the coin doesn't have any say. You're the one who has to pull the trigger, and he says, the coin got here the same way I did. Almost as if he's attaching himself to fate itself. Almost as if he is the representation of fate. Almost as if he is the person. He is the embodiment of death. Or life, depending on how you want to look at it, I guess. I don't really think there are too many answers to that particular scene, but I think that it is deliberately ambiguous. It does depict the matter of deciding, who gets to decide whether or not people live or who dies. And that's, to me, the most clear and easiest lesson or ethic to grab onto from the scene. But I think it is deliberately a bit confusing. It's trying to set up some sort of discussion. There is one line in particular, though, that I really love. As someone who is a big fan of uncompromising honesty in your speech, I love when the gas station clerk says, well, if that's the way you want to put it. And then Shigur responds with, I don't know some way to put it. That's the way it is. It's honestly just kind of refreshing. Like, even though it's coming from a psychopathic killer, to hear someone say, like, well, no, that's just the way it is. Like, there is objective truth. There is an objective way of looking at things. So the gas station scene does eliminate a lot of what the movie represents. Another line that illuminates what it represents is when Moss is talking to his wife and telling them that they have to go to Odessa in order to be safe from this killer. And of course, his wife doesn't like it. Carla Jean doesn't like it. But then Moss says, baby, things happen. I can't take him back. It's an underrated line, but I believe that it does represent a good portion of what this movie stands for. And perhaps an even more explicit line that more directly talks about what the movie is about is when Moss has Carson in his hotel room, and Carson knows he's about to die, and then Chigurh, really relishing in the fact that he totally owns the situation and he's holding someone's life in his own hand, says, I have a question. If the rule you followed, and the smile breaks across his face, if the rule you followed brought you to this, of what use was the rule? Of course, you could apply that principle to anybody. It could apply to Chigurh himself. If the rule that he followed brought him to this, of what use was the rule? Granted, he's not necessarily in a bad position. I mean, he's down $2 million. And Carson is in a worser position because he's about to get shot, but it could apply to anybody. At any given point, Chigurh could be in a bad spot. At any given point, any one of us could be in a bad spot, and then we could ask ourselves the same question. If the rule you followed brought you to this, of what use was the rule? So Moss finds a motel to buy himself some time from Chigurh, and I just love the way that it depicts like how little he cares about inconveniencing every clerk he comes across. I kind of wish I was a little bit more like that, not in a rude way, just in a way of presenting my rather outlandish requests with so little shame. Like when he's trying to get an extra room and he's like, no, I'll just take the room behind me. And the clerk's like, well, it's got 2 double beds. Like, I don't care. I want to be safe, that's all. Chigurh kicks down the room, he wreaks havoc to all the Mexicans, and then he searches the room for the money, and there's a practice that he does that I practice to this very day. He opens up the drawers from the bottom up. Makes total sense, doesn't it? I mean, it's better than going from the bottom down. I mean, unless, of course, you are such an energy time waster that you open it up and then close it. But no one does that, okay? Take the bottom drawer, open it up, and then go from the bottom up and just leave them all open, then close them all at once. Duh. I've seen this movie way too many times. Moss then decides that a motel is not good enough for him. He has to hide in a hotel in order to be able to be more safe from Chigurh. He goes from an M to an H. Now, the first time I ever watched this scene, I don't know if I've ever been so laser focused on what was happening. It seriously is one of the most masterful, most tense, most exciting scenes I have ever witnessed. The way that the camera zooms in closely, the way that it decides to focus in on certain things like Moss pulling out the trigger really, really quietly, the way that Moss realizes that, oh man, I have to turn the lamp off in order to be more silent, the way that Chigurh realizes I have to turn off the hallway light in order for him not to know what I'm doing, the way that the camera pans down to the doorknob and the tension is at an all-time high. Oh man, it's just, I can imagine the Coen brothers sitting around deciding how they're going to shoot this movie and just having the time of their life. So later we find out that Moss actually landed a shot on Chigurh, which I appreciate because it gives an extra layer of realism to the movie. You know, just because he's a psychotic killer who so far has been depicted as invincible doesn't mean that he actually is invincible. When he goes into a motel room and does that self-surgery scene, it serves 2 purposes. One, it's strangely relaxing. I mean, it's strangely relaxing to those that don't feel nauseous or faint when they see that kind of blood. I am one of those people. I don't necessarily mind the sight of blood and or gore, even though it is inherently gross, but it doesn't make me feel some kind of way. To watch Chigurh, once again, methodically and carefully executing his movements in order to repair himself without any kind of mistake or with any kind of hiccup is just strangely relaxing. So that's the first purpose it serves. The second purpose is that it actually depicts a lot of his character. Maybe he was some kind of war medic in the past, which is why he's so good with a shotgun, and which is why he's bought such an excellent, probably unrealistic silencer. Maybe he wasn't exactly a war medic, but has had some background in the medical field. Maybe he was kind of like that Nazi angel of death who just went into it because he had some morbid fantasy he wanted to fulfill. I don't know. But it's just cool to think about. The bleakness of this movie reaches a peak in the unceremonious killing of Moss. In fact, when I watched this with a friend, and the friend was watching it for the first time, when the camera is unwilling to even give us a full depiction of who's dead, my friend said, "Is that Moss, or was that Moss?" I said, "Yeah, that was Moss." Even I couldn't believe it the first time I saw it. I was like, wait, the hero's not supposed to be dead. But it's not just the hero that's dead, it's God who is dead. The sheriff visits an old colleague of his, and he goes up to the window and he says, "I thought that when I was older, God would somehow come into my life." But he never did. And that kind of solidifies The Land as being No Country for Old Men. The bad guy gets away. The good guy dies. And we don't really know where God and or justice is in all of this. No Country for Old Men really is a postmodern tale. It's one that takes the conventional rules of storytelling. You have the good guy who goes on his hero's journey and comes back victorious, and subverts them totally, where we don't even really know who the hero is in this movie. It centers around the lives of three men, but we don't really know who belongs and who doesn't. It's not very uplifting to think about, but it certainly is a wonderful work of art that is deserving of your attention. So No Country for Old Men, have you seen it? What are your thoughts about it? Whatever they are, let me know down in the comments below. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. I truly appreciate it, and I'll see you on the next cinematic adventure.